Throughout the history of gaming, there have been two common approaches when it comes to making something fun. One defined by fast-paced action combat, intricate level design, and overpowering weaponry. The other by rich storytelling, memorable characters, and immersive set pieces. Half-Life shattered the boundaries between these two approaches, forever transforming the first-person shooter genre. And 25 years later, it's hard to imagine a leap in gaming so monumental occurring. Half-Life not only revolutionized the technical and narrative aspects of the genre, it also served as a critical bridge from the raw pioneering shooters of the early 90s to the cinematic story-driven experiences that now dominate both PC and console markets. Hey kid, it's Old Man Banjo here. Today we're exploring the evolution of the first-person shooter leading up to Valve's revolutionary title. We'll then do a deep dive into Half-Life itself and uncover what made the game such an unmatched success. So to start, as we must, at the beginning, we need to head all the way back to Shreveport, Indiana in the early 90s. John Alfonso Romero, a software developer, was working at a company called Softdisk. There he formed a clique at the company alongside fellow employees John Carmack and Adrian Carmack, of no relation. The group called themselves Ideas from the Deep, and while working their day jobs at Softdisk creating games for its subscription service, the group caught the attention of Apogee Software's Scott Miller. Miller initially contacted Romero under the guise of a fan, sending letters to his office. However, when Romero realized that all his fan mail was coming from the same address sent by a Scott Miller who was very aware that Romero's current employer was checking his mail, Romero was then both disappointed by the ruse when he realized he didn't have any actual fan goals yet, but he was also intrigued enough to research who it was that had been sending him all these letters. Upon meeting Miller, the group left Softdisk to publish games with Apogee Studios. Their first release was the game Commander Keen, a relatively simple platformer, but albeit an enjoyable one. Following its modest success, the group decided to start their own company, which they would name id Software, or Ideas from the Deep Software. During the company's early days, John Carmack was primarily focused on the challenges they faced of rendering graphics on the limited computing power of early 90s home PCs. He developed a groundbreaking technique, using narrow corridors with simple geometry and rendering levels through raycasting instead of using pre-rendered 3D environments. With this method, Carmack dynamically drew walls and textures in real time only as the player turned to view them. This clever solution created the illusion of 3D and 3D movement without requiring full 3D processing, something which was not feasible at the time. Armed with their revolutionary new engine, the team struggled to decide on their first major project after the Commander Keen series. Eventually, they set their sights on reviving Muse Software's now defunct Wolfenstein series, a 1981 PC adventure game they had both enjoyed as kids. On May 5th, 1992, the group launched using an innovative shareware model. Players could either purchase a boxed retail version containing all 3 episodes, or pick up the first episode with 10 levels entirely for free. Those who wanted the full experience could then mail payment to id Software to purchase the remaining episodes. The ability to freely share the game between friends significantly boosted its popularity, and sales were strong. Combined with this fact, their small, agile team, id Software quickly found themselves rolling deep in cash. Bolstered by their newfound wealth and confidence in their abilities, the team turned their focus to creating their own original IP, one that would not only build on their success so far, but also establish an entirely new gaming genre. Cue the music. The early development of Doom was rife with creative conflicts. John Carmack sought to push the limits of technology, prioritizing technical innovation over story and narrative design. In contrast, Tom Hall, who worked at the company, focused on crafting a detailed narrative, developing a so-called Doom Bible that outlined the world's lore and envisioned a story-rich game. However, after repeated clashes with John Carmack and the team over the project's direction, Hall was eventually fired by John Romero, who wanted to steer the game more towards fast-paced action, emphasizing blood, gore, heavy metal, and otherworldly environments. To help achieve this vision, the team then brought in level designer Sandy Peterson and began work on a 3-episode shareware game centered on violent action combat. Doom was released on December 10, 1993, and marked the birth of the modern first-person shooter genre. Its fast-paced combat and intricate level design left behind the remnants of the traditional PC gaming limitations that were still present in Wolfenstein 3D. Although it still used a 2D engine, Doom introduced dynamic elements to its level design like stairs, elevators, and varied height levels, making the game much more dynamic than anything that had come before it. Along with this, it had dynamic lighting and shadows, giving it an atmosphere that many, including myself, still enjoy to this day. With its groundbreaking design, its amazing modding community, and unparalleled multiplayer features for the time, Doom became the definitive technical and creative milestone of the early 90s in gaming. And yet, despite its innovations, Doom was still, in a sense, an illusion, a two-dimensional game that used every conceivable and clever trick in computer science, lighting, and level design to convince players they were exploring a genuine 3D world. However, as CPU speeds increased and 3D accelerated graphics loomed on the horizon, the team at id Software set their sights on even greater heights. Carmack's work on id Software's next game engine would span several years. This engine would revolutionize gaming with fully 3D rendered graphics, individual polygons instead of raycasted environments. It would also have TCP dedicated servers for multiplayer, and an inbuilt physics engine that introduced complex player movement that was previously unimaginable in games like Doom. The era of technological breakthroughs, though, was far from over. By June 22, 1996, their new title, Quake, would be released on PC. Sadly, the labor and creative conflicts surrounding its groundbreaking release would be the end of Romero and Carmack's long partnership. But while it was the end of the classic era of id Software, it was the beginning of something entirely new, because shortly after the launch of Quake, Romero and a few others of the company would sit down with 2 former Microsoft employees who were eager for advice about starting their own gaming studio. Those employees, Mike Harrington and Gabe Newell, would leave id Software's offices that day with the source code for the Quake engine and begin development on a variety of projects which would eventually evolve into a game they would title Half-Life, a game that would turn them into one of the most important companies in the history of gaming. Newell and Harrington founded their company with a clear vision shaped by their experiences working at Microsoft. They prioritized overall a simple guiding principle, asking whether something was fun, and with this one principle in mind, they began hiring a team of young inventive programmers, level designers, and concept artists to follow it. Initially, the company worked on 2 separate projects, but as development progressed, all their efforts converged around Half-Life. This wasn't intended to be just another Quake-style shooter or a budget imitation. Instead, the team set out to create an original piece of intellectual property that would put their new studio on the map. And so, adhering to the studio's core rule of making fun things, they began to add things to the Quake formula and improve upon it. One of the most notable additions is the now iconic Half-Life crowbar. Unlike Doom or Quake, which relied on interactions via a simple key press, Half-Life introduced a much more tactile way for the player to engage with the environment. This crowbar allowed players to test objects for interactivity by attempting to break them, to uncover new pathways, or perhaps stumble upon hidden loot. This simple mechanic really increased the game's sense of immersion and the player's presence within the world. The team also made significant upgrades to the Quake engine by incorporating skeletal animations. This advancement enabled much more complex and lifelike character movements, and as a result, soldiers could do things like crouch down for better aim, head crabs can leap out of vents at your face, and NPCs were brought to life with subtle yet immersive actions that they do around the world. All of these innovations gave Half-Life a feeling of being alive that few of its contemporaries could compete with. The developers also adhered to another core principle. Every step forward in the game should trigger something new happening to the player. This philosophy shaped the pacing and tension of Half-Life, and throughout my playthrough, I found myself quick saving a lot, as almost every time I stepped into a new area, I was anticipating that something bad was going to happen. Even as someone that's playing the game decades later, this still struck me. The team's dedication to this principle, I feel, really ensures that players are constantly engaged in the levels that they would begin to build. Another aspect that felt revolutionary at the time, though it might be overlooked by a lot of the modern audience, was the sheer number of small NPC interactions that are present throughout the game. The scientists and soldiers inhabiting the Black Mesa complex aren't just decorations. They have their own routines and little actions. Scientists make coffee, they monitor their computer screens, and they exchange idle chatter. While rudimentary compared to later games like Skyrim or Oblivion, these touches made the world feel much more alive and immersive, and titles like Deus Ex and Bloodlines: The Masquerade would later expand on concepts like this. But in the end, it was Half-Life that paved the way. Not all the interactions, however, are of the positive kind. Some are in fact used to heighten the game's sense of horror and tension. Inspired by Stephen King's The Mist, which Gabe Newell had read during the game's development, Half-Life began to borrow from the novel's oppressive atmosphere and its terrifying use of tentacled creatures. The game's tentacled horrors, the violent fates we witness its NPCs suffer as they're dragged down vents, zombies and headcrabs, and massive explosions, create a sense of vulnerability. As Gordon Freeman, your escape seems not just to be a matter of intelligence, but also of sheer luck. Black Mesa isn't just a series of levels. It's a living, breathing space, a place where normal people go to work, now turned into a nightmare death trap. The use of immersion in games is now commonplace and has formed the foundation for successful franchises like Call of Duty. However, without Half-Life proving that this focus on immersion within a traditional run-and-gun shooter could lead to critical and commercial success, we might never have seen games like Call of Duty receive the opportunity to become a big-budget juggernaut in the first place. When I say Half-Life changed the first-person shooter forever, this is what I mean. The genre evolved from being a collection of fun levels filled with puzzles, enemies, and cool guns to an immersive narrative experience. At the time, industry veterans like John Carmack famously likened video game stories to the plot lines of adult movies. They served a function, but overall they were unimportant to whether the player had a good experience or not. Half-Life proved otherwise, and it did it conclusively. For all of Carmack's technical brilliance, he underestimated the role of narrative and immersion in elevating the first-person shooter. A game doesn't need to be a visual novel or a genre-defining RPG for its story and world building to matter. Doom and Quake didn't need heavy narratives to cement their place in gaming history, but Half-Life demonstrated that when developers like Gabe Newell and Mike Harrington care deeply about the worlds that they create, the players will care too. And the success that Half-Life would go on to see is undeniable evidence of this fact, and almost every game developer in the world took notice. Before diving into the game itself, I want to make a quick note about the versions of the game available. The original Half-Life was released with the WAN server system. This is the version most people experienced at launch. Later, with the release of Half-Life 2 on Steam, a new version was released using Steam's netcode alongside a few minor updates, some of them having come out quite recently. Valve then also ported the game to the Source engine, again back when Half-Life 2 came out. This version has received, to say, mixed reactions from the Half-Life community. But a lot of its flaws are actually better discussed in an analysis of Half-Life 2, which I'm going to get to eventually on this channel. Additionally, there's the 2020 release of Black Mesa, a fan project, a reimagined and remastered version of the original Half-Life with updated visuals and refinements to Half-Life's original rough final section in the Zen world. For this playthrough, I'm using the Steam version of the original Half-Life. I've tried disabling the updated models, but for some reason they keep coming back on as I played through the game. So you'll notice both the original and HD models appearing throughout this video. Now let's get started with our playthrough, because our alarm clock is buzzing and it's time to begin our daily commute. The game opens with its iconic introduction sequence. We board a tram that slowly takes us through the Black Mesa complex toward our workplace. We are, of course, none other than Gordon Freeman, PhD, MIT. In my opinion, this opening sequence tells you more about Half-Life and Valve as a studio than anything else they've ever made. Many games of the era experimented with elaborate intros, but Half-Life's opening tram ride stands out as a masterclass in environmental storytelling and pacing. The voiceover narration is subtly executed with a higher audio quality than the rest of the game's sounds, giving it a cinematic feel. Every section of the tram ride is meticulously crafted to convey different little bits of narrative, from mundane details like construction work to tantalizing hints at future levels, such as the rocket lying on the flatbed of a train. The lengthy sequence also establishes the vast scale of Black Mesa's facility, and it subtly emphasizes to the player just how deep underground we are going, a detail that will add weight to the further challenges ahead when things go wrong. As mentioned before, Gabe Newell was inspired by the lurking horror of Stephen King's The Mist. While the intro sequence is visually stunning, it carries with it this wonderful, ominous undertone. As players, we know that bad things are about to happen. This is, after all, a first-person shooter. There's going to be something for us to shoot. But each section of the tram ride serves to further isolate us from the outside world as we go further and further into the Black Mesa complex. Finally, we arrive at the Sector C test labs and control facilities. Just as another train departs, we spot something, or rather, someone that stands out. A man with a pale face dressed in a blue suit holding a briefcase, staring directly at us with an unsettling expression, if you can call it that. It won't be the last time we see him. At this point, Gordon Freeman may not think much of it, but we, the players, are already on edge. I remember being unnerved during my first playthrough, and even now, decades later, that feeling hasn't entirely faded as I replay to record footage for this video. And so our journey begins, and after a brief exchange with a security guard at the entrance, we step into the first proper level of Half-Life: Anomalous Materials. Anomalous Materials begins as we arrive in the foyer of Sector C in the reception area. Here we can interact with various NPCs, listen to their dialogue, and see them going about their daily life. If we attempt to move forward without getting our HEV suit, we're told to go and pick it up. So we follow the ribbon on the wall until we reach the employee locker room. We reach a room behind it where we're introduced to our HEV suit in the game's UI. This moment is particularly impactful to me because of its sound design, as the suit's commentary will provide updates on the state of our body throughout the game, and the sound design behind it all is absolutely excellent.
Welcome to the HEV Mark IV Protective System for use in hazardous environment conditions. High impact reactive armor activated.
With our new suit equipped, we head left and take the elevator down. In a little bit, we arrive at the control room for the materials test. Here we're informed that the resolution on the anti-mass spectrometer has been overclocked more than usual for this current sample. I'm not sure whether any of this scientific jargon is, real, but it does certainly scream health and safety violation to me. It's evident that the facility's administrators are definitely willing to skirt safety protocols to obtain accurate data from this sample for reasons that we don't know anything about as of yet. Another standout aspect of this scene is the voice acting here. I love the way this NPC delivers this ominous little line here.
They're waiting for you, Gordon, in the test chamber.
And with his foreboding words hanging in the air, we're off to the test chamber. Inside the test chamber, the sample is raised from the floor below. The anti-mass spectrometer powers up, and we're prompted to push the sample into the laser beam. This moment also subtly functions as a tutorial, teaching the player how to move objects in the game by pushing them. Naturally, the decision to push the sample into the mass spectrometer is a disastrous one. A resonance cascade occurs, triggering catastrophic events throughout the facility. A fun fact that's totally real is a survey that once revealed that 75% of Half-Life players reportedly lost sleep over fears of the Large Hadron Collider. What follows is a chaotic mess, devised by Valve in a single evening as the pair sat up designing the level. After a series of screen flashes, a bout of momentary darkness, we're suddenly transported to a strange alien world, face to face with one-eyed creatures observing us with their bulbous red balls. Moments later, we're jolted back to the test chamber, where the alarms are blaring, explosions are igniting around us, and with that, the game begins in earnest, as we move on to unforeseen consequences. This is, without a doubt, one of the best levels in Half-Life. As the Black Mesa complex descends into chaos around us, we must navigate a variety of hazards in our desperate attempt to escape. Early on, we come across the iconic crowbar lying in front of a door with a glass pane. This simple moment introduces one of Half-Life's most iconic innovations, smashing things with a crowbar. By smashing the individual panes of glass, we can proceed on into the elevator. It's a very straightforward mechanic, but it lays the groundwork for a key aspect of the game's immersive design. The player can really get to grips with and even destroy the world around them. As we continue, we learn that security guards can be used as companions, or perhaps more accurately, as cannon fodder with unlimited ammunition. When these guards inevitably meet their demise, they drop Half-Life's most basic firearm, the pistol. By this point, we've also gathered enough ammunition to deal with the game's most iconic enemy, the head crab. The head crab strikes a perfect balance between being utterly annoying and deeply satisfying to kill, precisely because it's so darn annoying. For the careful player, 2 precise pistol shots or a well-timed crowbar swing, batting them mid-leap like a grotesque baseball, gets the job done pretty well. However, their placement throughout the levels ensures they're not to be underestimated. Careless players can find themselves jumped by these critters at every turn. It demonstrates how much time the level designers put into punishing people who just wanted to run blindly through the level, the way certain people, and by certain people I mean me, tended to play games like Doom and Quake. While the game no doubt draws inspiration from Quake and Doom, the strategic design and placement of enemies like the head crab shows that Valve want you to approach their game with a little bit of caution and a little bit of forethought. In fact, speaking of Quake, it's worth acknowledging how Half-Life inherited the movement system from Quake's engine design. For all its innovation, atmosphere, and narrative design, Half-Life is at its core a Quake modification. It is built on the foundation of the Quake engine. And I'm gonna tell you, Gordon Freeman must have gotten into MIT on an athletics scholarship, because his average running speed is, I kid you not, 25 miles per hour. By bunny hopping from side to side, even casual players can push that speed probably up to around 50 miles per hour, give or take. Gordon Freeman is really fast. This combination of Quake-style speed and Half-Life's meticulously designed but dangerous environments can lead to plenty of deaths if you're not careful. But that's not a negative in my book. In fact, there are 2 essential ways to approach this game. You can slow things down, as I did in my playthrough here most of the time, acknowledging that your old man hands are too old to deal with Gordon's insane walking speed during the more difficult sections of the game. Or you can fully embrace the insane pace, mastering the movement style of a game like Quake and employ it in Half-Life to utterly dominate. Although Half-Life was released in an era before speedrunning and esports really took hold, it does feature an impressive skill ceiling. And this depth, I think, is one of the key reasons for its enduring replayability. Eventually, we'll make our way behind to the reception area, climbing over a now destroyed computer system to enter a series of maintenance passageways. The shift in atmosphere during this level is remarkable, and thanks to the texture designer's insistence on giving each area its own distinct aesthetic by banning the developers from stealing all of her textures, this thoughtful approach really helps the player navigate each area, as each area has its own distinct sense and setting. During this part of the level, we're introduced to the mechanic of using scientists to open doors that Gordon himself cannot access. Spoiler alert here. There's a lot of things about Black Mesa that Gordon doesn't know. As we descend via a massive elevator, the gameplay ramps up with a chaotic head crab bullet hell where the creatures are flung at us from above the elevator. This is followed by the game's first jumping puzzle, if you can call it that, through this ambient large hallway. And with that, we move on to the office complex. The office complex level exemplifies something that I'm going to say throughout this retrospective, that at each level, Valve wants to play with a new, fun idea, and for this level, the focus is clearly on the game's atmospheric horror and puzzling element, as well as its second to be introduced enemy, the Vortigaunt. These creatures take a few pistol shots or 2 shotgun blasts to kill. While they're harmless initially, they become deadly if given the chance to charge up their beam attack, which deals a lot of damage. Their inclusion adds some welcome variety, as their behavior and combat strategy are very different from that of the headcrabs. In fact, according to Valve's developers, the Vortigaunt was designed specifically to appear in the early stages of the game so that we weren't just stuck fighting endless amounts of headcrabs. An interesting bit of trivia here, I'm pretty sure that Vortigaunts are based on the Vortigaunts, the primary antagonist in id Software's Commander Keen series. See, everything just connects here, doesn't it? The level also introduces some puzzle-solving mechanics in the form of environmental switches. For example, we encounter a room flooded with live electricity running through the water. This requires us to deactivate the current by safely switching off the lighting and then proceeding into the vent, rather than, of course, running through the water and getting electrocuted like I tended to do. Later, we can disable a turret we come across by flipping a switch below it, showcasing yet another layer of interaction the player can do with the environment. Eventually, we reach a long hallway where a poor scientist meets his demise, and it's here we discover just how athletic Gordon Freeman can truly be. Players must make what seemed to me, at least initially, an impossible leap to grab the ladder on the far side of the elevator shaft. This is clearly a tutorial to teach the player the importance of timing their jumps and the precision required in traversing many of the game's hazardous areas. After doing this, we climb up on top of the elevator, drop inside, and descend further into the depths of Black Mesa. And with that, we find ourselves in the game's third level. As this level begins, we witness a poor, desperate scientist pleading with the security guard to open the silo doors and let him on into the next section. Unfortunately for him, the security guard that is, there's something lurking in the vent behind him. This level will revolve around working our way back to that vent, the one that we just saw the security guard pulled into, so that we can drop down and open the gate to move on ourselves. This is also where we're introduced to sentry guns, a new environmental hazard if you can call it that. These AI-controlled turrets are triggered remotely by laser beams and can be destroyed by just dealing damage to them as normal. They're placed by soldiers who are here to exterminate the invading aliens and, as it will turn out, us too. And along with the sentry guns, we're also introduced to a major new enemy, the Marine Grunt from the Army's Hazardous Environmental Combat Unit. It quickly becomes apparent, as I already said, that the military isn't just here to handle the aliens. They've been sent to eliminate the facility's employees as well. Functionally, the Marines feel a lot like a mirror of Gordon Freeman. They're equipped with the same machine guns that we can now pick up after defeating them. These enemies are far more durable than the Vortigaunts or headcrabs, but they drop ammo as a reward for taking them down. The Marines' weapons, however, and this is a complaint people often have of Half-Life, are hit scan, meaning that as long as they have a clear line of sight, their shots will land on you instantly, taking away your precious health and armor. Gordon Freeman's extraordinary speed might keep him alive against alien creatures, but he can't outrun literal bullets. Combat against the Marines requires some more tactical thinking. It's best to flank them or wait for moments when they're reloading to make your move. This level alternates between narrow checkpoints where we must carefully avoid turret fire and wide or open areas that escalate into intense firefights between us and the Marines. The Marines also heighten the importance of Half-Life's audio design. While sound cues like the distinct chirping of a headcrab were helpful before in letting us know that danger was near, the Marines take things to another level. Players can hear them communicating over their radios with audio cues for actions like them throwing a grenade, retreating, or reloading. This creates a sense of anticipation and tension before combat begins, which is nice, but it also reinforces the idea that the facility isn't just a static environment, but a living, breathing space that is now occupied by 3 factions: the desperate Black Mesa employees and security guards, the military, and the invading Xen aliens. A common issue with many shooters of this era was that levels often felt empty and lifeless once the shooting stopped. Gabe Newell made clear that in Half-Life, none of the locations were ever to feel that way unless it was intentional. The attention to detail and atmosphere keeps the immersion intact throughout the player's experience. And so, as we progress, we navigate a dark and disorientating series of vents, and they're of course teeming with headcrabs. But after many twists and turns, we finally find our way back to that control station and succeed in opening up the silo doors. What awaits us next is the game's first boss battle in the Blast Pit. The Blast Pit is a level that most clearly demonstrates just how far ahead Half-Life was technically compared to its predecessors Doom and Quake. At the same time though, it's also a level that frustrated me to no end as a kid. I think it even caused me to rage quit the game for several weeks when I first encountered it. The level begins as we exit the silo doors and take a brief ride on the tram. This sequence also serves as a tutorial on how to operate the tram, as we'll need to know how to do that later on. We use the interact key to board and W and S to move along the linear track. After traversing an area filled with radioactive waste, we arrive at a massive circular chamber dominated by a towering central building. As we make our way inside, the sound of knocking grows louder and more ominous. Shortly after, we encounter a mortally wounded scientist who warns us to, quote, destroy the damn thing before it grows any larger. We ascend the stairs and are greeted by this horrifying sight. The button to eliminate this monster is tantalizingly close, right in front of us, but it's also not functioning. In order to use it, we need to restore fuel, oxygen, and power to the system. Unfortunately, the pathways leading towards those things are blocked by said tentacle monster. While the monster is blind, it responds aggressively to sound, so we can use grenades to create distractions, crouch to stay silent, and navigate our way past it. Though I'll be honest with you, playing the game at 144 frames per second with Gordon Freeman's lightning fast movement speed led to me having quite a lot of mishaps here, where I would accidentally run or make noise, getting myself killed in the process. From mistimed ladder descents to accidentally bunny hopping and just flying off a platform, I died here more times than I care to admit for this video. In fact, at the end of this, I even replayed the level a few times just for the satisfaction of conquering this wannabe Cthulhu. In order to proceed, we first need to head down one floor, avoiding its deadly strikes as we do so, and use the crowbar to break through the wooden planks quietly as possible to get into the next section. This leads us on to the area where we can turn on the oxygen and fuel by tracing their respective pipes back to an outdoor area with a fan. After activating the fan and dodging its spinning blades on the way up, we're propelled upwards in a whimsical sorta Charlie and the Chocolate Factory moment. Eventually breaking through a vent, we can restore oxygen and fuel to the system. The next step involves heading back out, dodging yet more tentacled strikes as we go down to the next level. After jumping across the gap to the other side, we can follow the power cable into another section of the facility. Here, some tricky platforming awaits, and I must admit I personally struggle with this section of the level until I get my grips with it. Once the power is back online, we need to navigate our way over the now electrified puddles to head back to the control panel and finally press the button at the top of the room to deliver vengeance to our many-headed foe. This obliterates the tentacle monster along with the poor security guard that I didn't tell not to stand in the room. With our enemy obliterated, we descend into the hole it leaves behind. This bit of the level always leaves me asking, how does Gordon Freeman know where to go next? After crawling through the tunnels, we emerge into our next level. We arrive at Black Mesa's internal rail station to find the Marines are not having much luck dealing with the game's new enemy. The Gargantua is an enormous, invulnerable foe that neither the player nor the Marines are able to kill. So we'll need to pull off some PhD level problem solving to take him down. Though for now, our only option is to run. We need to break into the control room where a security guard informs us that we need to restore power to get the rail system operating again. This sets the stage for the rest of the level, which involves us battling through a relentless number of Marines, avoiding yet more traps, and contending with Garg as he looms above. Eventually, having fought off the Marines, we make our way to the generator, only to find that the water at the bottom of the room needs to be drained before we can get it running. Here the game introduces an interesting mechanic. Breaking parts of the environment can actually be the solution to a particular puzzle. By breaking the crates blocking the pump, the pistons will get going again and we can restore the generator. Now that the generator is functioning again, we need to head back up to the control room where we can flip a switch to get the rail line running again. Now that the rail line is powered up, we can basically run like Usain Bolt, sprint past Garg and lure him down the tunnel to the right. Garg will follow us down the tunnel where we can lure him between the two transformers, flip a switch, and electrify him. With Garg now neutralized, we can make our way back out, jump on the train, drive through the cement bricks blocking our way forward, and now head on quickly to the game's next level. On Rails. This level is based on the work of some of the developers at Valve who wanted to add vehicles into the game. While Half-Life 2 would go on to have some of the most memorable vehicle levels in gaming, this, ladies and gentlemen, is certainly not one of them. Don't get me wrong though, it's not a bad level. At the start of it, we're told we need to travel on through to the silo in order to launch a satellite the military is trying to stop because of science reasons. The scientists think that this satellite will be necessary to stop whatever is causing the resonance cascade to continue. And for some reason, the military doesn't want the portal to close, or doesn't know, it's unclear at this point. The oncoming mix of rails and track switches could have turned into a real nightmare, and it doesn't because the level designers on this game are just too darn good to let that happen. The only mechanic here for navigating are switches that clearly indicate to us where the train will turn next, and players must navigate around the area by experimenting where these different tracks will lead. I suffer from dyslexia and have literally the worst sense of navigation possible for a human being. But even for me, the navigation is pretty alright given how well signposted everything is to the player. My favorite moments in this level are when you need to duck in the rail cart as it moves forward to avoid oncoming projectiles such as missiles. I can't quite put my finger on it, but there's something about this that gives me such a nice feeling of being in an action movie, and I think few games have ever replicated it quite as nicely as this section does. Eventually, we come to a section that is blocked off by a crane in the middle of the tracks, and because it's blocked, it must mean it's the way forward, because that's how things work when you're Gordon Freeman. A simple look around the area shows that the tower controlling it is unavailable from our current platform, so we must make our way around to it, open the way forward, and continue on. The next few sections are an utter bloodbath of fights with Marines, including one section that is a dead end, in which, if you fail to recognize it quickly enough, a Marine will explode the entire tunnel with you in it. Just Valve's way of rewarding the player for their sense of exploration. Eventually, after all our trials and tribulations, we make our way up towards the silo and finally see the sky for the first time in the game so far. A beautiful sight I would enjoy more if there wasn't a sniper taking loads of my health off every few seconds. There's another puzzle here that involves placing crates so we can jump on top of them to avoid setting off the mines ahead. Once we're inside, we make our way through and fire off that rocket. I know I've said it before, but Valve's philosophy of making things because they are fun is such a great idea. Pushing buttons to launch rockets while electronic music starts playing in the background is so satisfying. So many games these days just don't take the time to appreciate the little things. If it was a modern game, this would have been a scripted cutscene. I don't want a scripted cutscene. I want to run around the room with my ADHD brain as I watch the fireworks show. It makes it feel more like something I did, even though it's just a simple in-game trigger for an animation. With that, if we make our way all the way back out, there's a new passageway now open from where we came in. And with that, we have left for apprehension. Let me stop for a moment to rant about something as my big 4-0 birthday looms ever closer and I hear the Reaper beginning to sharpen his scythe as I write this script. The introduction to this level showcases everything good about old gaming and bad about modern AAA titles. We begin this level as our train veers off the tracks toward a group of Marines, crashes through a corrugated steel door, and plummets into the pit below. Now this scene is simple enough for its time. But you'll notice from the footage that I died from the fall. Do you know why I died? because I've grown too numb to these type of sequences in AAA games, where I've come to expect either a command prompt to do something mildly gameplay related, think Uncharted or Tomb Raider, or to assume that this is just a cinematic where I will safely land in a pre-scripted event. What these devices ultimately do is tell me, the player, that there's no real danger. Valve engages in no such nonsense. As my train is crashing, I, the player, need to figure out how to survive. There are multiple ways to do so. You can jump off early and then descend later, or you can make a diving jump into the waters below. But you, the player, will have to figure this out for yourself. The game will not hold your hand. This is a train crash, and you need to find a way out of it. This hardcore approach gives Half-Life's random events a genuine sense of danger and makes the world feel meaningful. Do you know what other game adopted this philosophy? The Dark Souls series. Actually, I'll talk about this later on in this video. Players appreciate when in-game events challenge them to overcome obstacles through their own agency. With that praise out of the way, though, let's move back onto the gameplay. This is the first level of the game to feature water as a core element. And I know gamers generally loathe water levels, but this one isn't so bad. After swimming through the initial area, we encounter a large pool of water surrounded by a walkway with an ominous shark cage hung above it. We ascend to a nearby tower where a scientist warns us of what we probably already guessed: there's something bad lurking down there in the water. What follows is a wonderful little set piece as we approach the shark cage and grab the game's new weapon, a hit-scan crossbow with a full bolt magazine. The hit-scanning functionality I find is crucial for dealing with the Ichthyosaur, the fast shark-like monster that we're about to meet down in the water. Once we've taken down our aquatic Moby Dick, we turn the wheel to proceed onwards. What comes next is a sequence that really tests the player's ability to calculate their air supply while navigating through the underwater passages. After a short platforming section involving jumping in between some pistons to get to the other side of a room, we meet with a scientist who tells us that if we want to get to the Lambda complex, which is the MacGuffin we're currently headed towards, we need to go through a large freezer and on to the next area. Rushing through the freezer like a madman to get out before our suit's power fades, we then emerge into an open area that any seasoned gamer will immediately recognize as a boss encounter. Here we are confronted by the game's new enemy, the Assassin. The Assassins are formidable because they can retreat and kite Gordon from a distance, making them frustrating to pin down the way you have with most enemies thus far in the game. Their weapons are also hit scan. If you're unlucky with where they flee, you can easily lose a large amount of your health trying to chase them down while they're taking shots at you. After cornering them though with a few well-placed shotgun blasts, grenades, or whatever other heavy firepower you have on hand, they will go down. With them down, you can climb to the top of the platform, flip the switch to open the large doors, and we can proceed onwards to the surface. Or not.
Nice hit. Alright, we got him.
Where are we taking this Freeman guy? Upside for questioning. What the hell for? We got him. Let's kill him now. And if they find the body? Body? What body?
Our unconscious body is walked by two Marines and thrown into a trash compactor. But unlike Luke Skywalker, we have no droids to rescue us. So we've got to do a little platforming, rearm ourselves with our crowbar, and escape through a grate in the bottom of the room. Yes, that's correct, we've lost all our weapon and ammunition, and as we'll see, we've got a big level coming up next, and Valve clearly didn't want us overstocked when we came to it. This level here though is simple enough. We're in an area where the residue is mined from the New Mexico desert and is processed presumably into the crystal that we used at the start of the game. It's unclear. The level begins with us outside. We need to lower a tank down, jump on top of it, and sneak into the residue processing facility. Once inside, we see a lone guard fighting off some head crabs and a lot of vats full of goo. This level probably involves the most platforming in the entire game, besides maybe the game's final levels, as there are few enemies and in turn we have very scarce weaponry. we've got to make our way through all the big scary crushing and grinding machines, and then through a series of conveyor belts. If it's your first time here, this can be quite tricky to figure out where to go, especially at the very end. But if you manage to make it through all these obstacles without getting crushed or ground into pulp, the level is overall alright. Once we make our way through, we go out a vent and immediately emerge into the next level, questionable ethics. And I'll tell you what is ethically questionable here, the way Valve began this level. We find ourselves in the kennels for the Sonic dogs, the eyehounds that we've been seeing throughout the game. I probably forgot to mention them before because in general they just aren't that much of a threat. I doubt they even really want to hurt you, it's just the noises they make when they get excited are too darn loud for Gordon and end up doing damage in an AoE circle around them. But suddenly finding ourselves trapped in a small area with them is a totally different kettle of fish. In fact, I definitely died here the first time. However, with a deft jump out of the kennel, we are now in what appears to be a weapon research lab for the Black Mesa complex. It's also worth noting here something that I haven't discussed in the game so far. While it is clear that certain enemies such as the invading Vortigaunts and large monsters like Garg are teleporting into the Black Mesa facility as part of some attack, presumably following up the Resonance Cascade, many of these environments tell us that Black Mesa has already been experimenting on various creatures from the Zen world, or potentially other worlds. The shark monster back in the previous level, the eyehounds now in their kennels, and as we'll see in this level, the head crabs in their assigned shooting ranges, though to be honest, I'm not sure whether that's intentional or not. Maybe they just ended up in there, it's unclear. Anyways, the level's name is Questionable Ethics. And another ethically questionable thing about this level is that we get a railgun, or Tau gun as it's officially called. Right now, we don't need it all that much, but we're going to very shortly once we get to the surface proper. But the point here for story purposes is that there is a clear conspiracy going on at Black Mesa that Gordon didn't have the clearance to be informed of, and that there were people at the complex, many of them, that were clear about the risk of the cascade and the existence of alien life. The reason it's worth it to mention this now is that this is the level where it's supposed to become obvious to the player as we move through the questionable ethics section and see all the testing that's being done on these alien life forms. It's also important for thinking about who the good and bad guys really are and what this will mean for what comes next as the Resonant Cascade turns from an accident into an act of interdimensional conflict. To get through the next area and out onto the surface, we need one of the scientists to open the front doors of the complex, but getting to them is going to be tricky, as it always is for Gordon Freeman. We need to fight our way out past a set of Marines through a series of laboratories. In each of these 4 laboratories, we need to press a switch to power on the big science laser. Once the laser is powered on, we're disappointed to find out that the blast shield protects the wall it fires at. This is fixed by simply shoving the nearby crate underneath the shield wall, and voila, we've blown our way through into a room full of scientists, any of which would be happy to let us through and out of the complex. After turning off this lovely slicing thing and escorting the scientists through, we're out and onto the game's magnum opus level, the level that really defines Half-Life 1 for me. Surface Tension. This level shows a lot of aspirations that seem almost unjustified for the then new and experienced Valve. Aspirations that 99% of the time would have led to failure. But ladies and gentlemen, Surface Tension just works as a level. It is by far the largest level in Half-Life. In fact, someone fight me in the comments below if I'm wrong, but I believe at the time it was probably the largest single level ever created in a single-player 3D video game. Sure, this is technically cheating, since Half-Life uses a save state system to expand the map as you progress through it, but Valve's intent is still clear: to celebrate Gordon Freeman's arrival on the surface with an epically large and ambitious level. The level starts as we're greeted on the surface by a new friend for this chapter, a helicopter. While it is possible to take it down, I tend to skip it for now because it's a massive waste of ammo and we're going to confront more of them later on. Jumping into the water near the dam, we're reintroduced to our old pal, the shark-like ichthyosaur. After taking it out and opening the vents nearby, we swim through the dam and onward to the next section. This then leads to a series of areas filled with mines. Eventually, we'll have to open a hatch to continue descending. The difficulty also noticeably ramps up here. This tunnel leads us to one of my favorite moments in the game. After everything we've endured underground, we emerge to witness a fighter jet zoom past, taking out a helicopter as we stand gazing across the New Mexican mesas. The developers reportedly wanted to evoke a sense of vertigo here, and this area delivers beautifully on that. After spending so much time in confined spaces, the sudden shift to such an open, high-altitude environment feels disorientating and awe-inspiring. Even if the background visuals haven't aged particularly well, the impact of this moment remains strong for me. Continuing through onto the next section featuring yet another storm drain, oh hello there, Mr. Headcrab, we're faced with a group of Marines stationed behind sandbags. Charging in headfirst will get you railed faster than an attractive college freshman at a party, so let's not do that. This section of the level really showcases the value that Valve place on Half-Life's tactical combat, which, as I've said before, sets it apart from less tactical shooters like Doom and Quake. We're forced to flank and pick off the Marines, going through tunnels and popping up like a gopher, taking them out one by one. Sadly for us, it turns out these guys aren't just armed with guns, they've also got a nice big tank. Specifically what I think is an Abrams M1, correct me tank enthusiasts if I'm wrong. To deal with this, we also have to sneak around, flank the tank, and take out the remaining Marines. In a surprising twist, the next section has us crawling atop a roof and then in and through the ordnance warehouse that the Marines have now rigged to explode. Here once again, Valve demonstrates their design genius. In the game's most open level, they suddenly throw us into a very claustrophobic segment. It's a clever and unexpected shift in pacing. As the level progresses, it becomes clear that the Marines are losing this battle. At this point, we're introduced to a new enemy, the alien grunt. Unlike the Marine grunts, these guys are formidable foes. They come armed with the Hornet gun, a weapon that does exactly what its name suggests. It fires homing space hornets at the nearest target. The gun reloads automatically on a timer, which becomes crucial later in the game when ammo is scarce. The alien grunts themselves are tanky as all hell, but by now we've got a range of tools to deal with them. The final section of this level sees us locked out of progressing further on towards the Lambda complex. We're told that we might have a shot at stopping whatever is keeping the portal open and causing the resonance cascade there. At least that's the trail of breadcrumbs that every scientist along the way has been telling us about as we've progressed. This leads to a desperate hunt for a security guard so that he can open the gate to get us to the final section of the level. The level's climactic puzzle is both exhilarating and terrifying. We need to coordinate an airstrike on 4 targets: the wall in front of the doorway forward, the wall to its right, and the antenna tower. Hitting all these points creates a clear path forward and on to the next level. Unfortunately, the puzzle is complicated by the presence of an unstoppable Gigantua that is smashing through everything and rapidly closing in on our position. My experience with this section has been wildly inconsistent. On one attempt, the boss just stood there and gave me plenty of time to leisurely complete the puzzle while sipping tea and recording the explosions for this video. However, on other attempts, when I realized I hadn't recorded everything I needed, the boss charged at me relentlessly, leaving me with a heart-pounding 30 seconds to complete the entire puzzle sequence, which really felt unreasonably difficult. Regardless, with the puzzle solved, we're off to the next level. Forget about Freeman. This level begins with a little environment-based puzzle that involves us looking up at the roof to see which bits of ceiling are going to fall next so that we can avoid them. With that done, we move on and hear over the radio that the Marines are now abandoning the base, literally being told to forget about Freeman. At this point, we really start facing hordes of enemies, and playing in a way that isn't well thought out and strategic will likely lead to you being absolutely destroyed in the game's larger areas that are now full of enemies. It's also worth mentioning the Snark here. We were actually introduced to the Snark at some of the earlier levels, but I'll mention them now. Snarks are little tiny red things. Imagine headcrabs but faster and more annoying. However, the nice thing about Snarks is we can actually pick them up, caress them in our hands, and use them as little mines, essentially. However, for my playthrough, I didn't get much use out of them. Someone tell me in the comments if they're actually useful, but I've just never found them that great on any of my Half-Life playthrough. There's also an area here where we get to sort of take control of a tank. You can really tell that Valve wanted to add extensive vehicle levels to Half-Life and just didn't get the chance. Again, something we'll see them correct in Half-Life 2. There's really not all that much to say about Forget About Freeman. It's basically a series of rooms with enemies that we need to fight through to get on to the game's next, much larger, more substantial level. The Lambda Complex. The Lambda Complex is perhaps Valve's most intricate level from a puzzle platforming perspective, but it's also the point where the game's difficulty ramps up to become just a tad frustrating, at least to me. We're once again greeted at the start of the level by the assassin enemies, which are really super fun to fight when you have low health and ammo has become even scarcer. After descending the elevator, the level begins in earnest. Our task is to turn on 2 water pumps, but this isn't so simple. Alien hornet shooting grunts spawn all over the area. These enemies require a lot of ammunition to take down, and with their tracking hornets constantly in pursuit, being efficient is really key here. You can use the revolver or crossbow to dispatch them quickly, or you can conserve ammo by using their own hornet gun against them. However, this can be really tricky given their high health and the fact that you're often outnumbered with the slow reload time of the gun. Once we manage to switch both the pumps on, we now need to dodge electric beams on the way up to the generator. After switching everything on, we can finally enter the Lambda Complex properly. What comes next involves the only part of this game I genuinely dislike. There's a series of teleporters and platforms you need to navigate. Picking the wrong teleporter restarts the sequence for you, though you're at least rewarded for your misstep with more ammo and armor, something you're desperately going to need for what's coming next, so make all the errors you want in this section. After a lot of trial and error, we make our way up to the top portal. Someone will undoubtedly point out in the comments that I've been doing this wrong for 20 years, and maybe there is a way to tell which portal is the correct one, but either way, you want all the health and ammo you can get at this point, so make a lot of mistakes. Taking the portal at the top leads us to another room that involves yet more platforming. Here we need to push 2 buttons on either side of the room, before then once again diving into a portal in the center. Once through this frustrating segment, we encounter a scientist and a guard who will guide us into the next area where things are about to get very epic. We're informed that we're being sent alone as mankind's last hope, tasked with tracking down the powerful entity that is keeping the portal opened, the portal that was started by the resonance cascade at the start of the game. To aid us, we're granted a jump boost ability, which we activate by holding the crouch key as we jump. This will be crucial for navigating the levels to come. What follows is an epic sequence where we must defend the scientist from the game's newest and most annoying enemy, the alien controller. These are the first proper flying enemies in the game. They fire waves of projectiles that must be dodged. In this instance, they're not too frustrating because the whole sequence is pretty short, and I usually just conserve my ammo here and run around and hope the scientist doesn't die. But these guys will prove to be a massive headache later on. Eventually, the portal in the center of the room begins to open, and in what feels like a reverse of the game's opening sequence, we dive headfirst into the portal, traveling to another world rather than opening a portal to our own. And with that, we arrive in Xen. The jump to Xen really shows once again Half-Life's ambition to be the big one, the game of games, the title that did it all. These levels also show that the development time was clearly a bit tight, and at least for me, they feel less developed than the levels set on good old Earth. That said, after hours spent in the labs of Black Mesa, standing atop a platform overlooking this strange alien land is absolutely breathtaking, even today with the Quake engine's outdated graphics. I've always believed that what makes a game's visuals good isn't necessarily their fidelity, but their ability to tell a story. And these visuals are telling us that we're definitely not in New Mexico anymore, Toto. Our first task is to get down to ground level, or whatever you'd call it on this space rock that we've landed on. We can achieve this by using our new double jump, which I must add, I found rather easy and didn't die at all during any of the platforming sections in Xen. Once we made it down, we circle around the side of the rock and find a small crack leading inside. Here we discover a room with 3 strange alien receptacles. Activating them all allows us to smash a cage containing some fluttering butterfly-like insects, which in turn opens a portal to the next level. Gonarch. In the next level, we face yet another boss battle. At this point, I've honestly lost track of how many bosses there are. It depends on how you want to count them. For instance, to me, Garg and the tentacle creatures certainly feel like boss encounters. However, if we're only counting bosses that we directly engage in combat with, then this is arguably the first proper boss encounter in the game, depending on how you see things. The fight takes place in an arena that will immediately give any seasoned gamer that classic boss room dread. But the battle itself isn't too tough. It's more a battle of attrition because remember, now that we're on Zen, you can't get any more ammo. The Gonarch is presumably the matron of the headcrabs or perhaps what a headcrab would go into when fully matured. We unload everything we've got onto the Gonarch, chasing it through 3 different sections of the level. Eventually it falls down and we quite literally get the jump on it. With the Gonarch down, but now very low on ammo and health, we proceed on to the game's final sections. Now I know I've already mentioned that the Zen world doesn't have a lot of ammo, but this is the point in my playthrough where I began to realize that this was a really ingenious design choice. Sure, I may feel super heroic for beating the Gonarch by spamming ammo at it, but guess what? I'm in Zen, and I'm now almost out of ammo. I'm stuck with the Hornet gun and the occasional scattering of nuclear supplies left behind by the research teams that ventured over, so I can't on occasion use my Tau cannon. I begin this level by sprinting to the nearest healing pool, which is at a cave in the back of the area. I'm really glad the devs added infinite healing to this section. There are quite a few sections in the remainder of the game where we can just stand and heal to full over time, because without that, this could easily become unplayable fast depending on where your last save point was. The area outside the cave is positively swarming with Vortigaunts. Finding our way into the cave back, we can heal up at the aforementioned pool. Staying true to its name, I began to realize I was indeed an interloper in this level. Using the traditional approach of slow, methodical first-person shooter combat that I'd been employing throughout my playthrough so far was really no longer effective at this point. Instead, I started leveraging Gordon Freeman's speed to my advantage. As we progress through the cave, we eventually find a column we can stand on to ride to the very top. Standing at the top provides us with yet another jumping puzzle. This time we need to jump down and eventually hitch a ride on the back of one of the flying manta rays in the area. This will take us to a teleporter on the far side of the area. This section is perfectly fine, provided you've mastered Gordon Freeman's jumping and movement abilities. Oh wait, you haven't? Well then quick save is definitely your best friend here. Once we land on the back of the manta ray, we're off to the teleporter. The teleporter takes us to an alien factory of some kind, a place teeming with Vortigaunts. If you pay close attention, you'll notice the factory is producing the alien grunts we've been fighting in the latter half of the game. However, you'll most likely figure this out when either your shots or the enemies break open the crates scattered in the area, releasing the grunts inside. Again, quick save is your friend because once they're out, you've now got to find a way to kill them. It's entirely possible to land yourself in a near impossible situation by blowing up too many of these at once, so be careful. We make our way up several elevators, all of which are positioned in the center of the room, leaving us exposed to shots from the surrounding Vortigaunts, so we need to take out quite a few to progress. Here I relied heavily on the Hornet gun and the healing pools to stay alive, as I was almost completely out of ammo by this point. Eventually, we reached the top of the alien factory, with alien controllers firing at us from all directions. After ascending the final 2 cogwheel elevators, we dive into the portal at the very top of the Zen factory. And with that, we're off to the heart of the realm itself. An easy platforming section follows, culminating in a foreboding red teleporter that seems to taunt us with a silent, "Good luck, you're going to need it," as we dive into the game's final boss room. Nalath. The Nalath fight is simultaneously simple, amazingly complex, and frustrating. It has a variety of attacks, most of which are straightforward projectiles, fired in different patterns that we just need to dodge. The floor of the arena is covered with sharp outcroppings that provide us cover. If it were just about dodging the projectiles alone, the boss battle would actually be pretty easy to do. However, to defeat Nalath, we need to destroy 3 crystals embedded in the cave walls above. This will expose its flower-like head, at which point we can jump up above it and nuke its brains out. What makes Nalath particularly challenging is its green orb attack. Getting hit by this teleports the player into a jumping puzzle room. Thankfully, while these puzzles are often annoying and filled with enemies, successfully traversing them rewards us with something we desperately need at this point in the game: ammunition, particularly for the rocket launcher, which I realized just now I've neglected to mention. Yes, Gordon Freeman has a rocket launcher. It's incredibly useful here. Using its laser sights, we can target the crystals while dodging incoming projectiles. I ended up getting hit by the green orb 3 times during the boss fight, which forced me to complete all of the jumping puzzles. The boss itself isn't overly difficult, but the jumps required at the very end to expose its head can be a bit tricky. Again, as I've said several times throughout this retrospective, the jumping and movement in the Half-Life series is actually reasonably high in skill cap. This fight doesn't disappoint though in terms of its epicness. There's a real sense of triumph as you finally float high above Nalath, delivering the final blast to its brains. But our victory, for better or for worse, concludes with, well, why don't I let him explain it to you?
In the flesh, or rather in the hazard suit, I took the liberty of relieving you of your weapons. Most of them were government property. As for the suit, I think you've earned it. The border world, then, is in our control for the time being, thanks to you. Quite a nasty piece of work you managed over there. I am impressed. That's why I'm here, Mr. Freeman. I have recommended your services to my employers, and they have authorized me to offer you a job. They agree with me that you have limitless potential. You've proved yourself a decisive man, so I don't expect you'll have any trouble deciding what to do. If you're interested, just step into the portal, and I will take that as a yes. Otherwise, well, I can offer you a battle you have no chance of winning. Rather an anticlimax after what you've just survived. Time to choose.
So we're faced with 2 choices. Take the job offer from the G-Man to step into the portal, or fight back and face endless waves of enemies in a battle we cannot win. Since this is part 1 of my Half-Life retrospective series, we'll take the portal and see where it leads us. And with that, the credits roll. So let's go through a brief summary of the events of Gordon Freeman's very busy day at work. Feel free to disagree with me about this in the comments below. I think speculating about the Half-Life plot is really interesting. What I think happened is we saw the G-Man at the very start of the game. He had arrived that day with his employers bringing the new sample. Whoever is behind the Black Mesa facility at the upper levels of the US government is not human and really wanted us to overcharge the crystal and open the portal to Zen. Almost everything I believe about the game's plot actually comes from the game's final boss battle. Nalath is clearly trying to tell us that the G-Man is not human and has deceived us. That Nalath is the last of his race, and we have been used as a pawn to hunt him down. Now that he has been defeated and the portal has been opened, we are going to be eliminated in the same way that his species was eliminated. In the end, our victory is hollow, and all we have done is forwarded an imperialist alien conspiracy at the very top of the presumably US government. And now that we've won against the Zen, we've put our world firmly in the crosshairs. How much it is now in the crosshairs is something we will find out when we eventually step out of that train car we end the game in. But let's leave that to our video on Half-Life 2. Please do like and subscribe if you've watched this far. It always surprises me when I look at my YouTube analytics and see that people actually took an hour out of their day to watch one of my videos, so thank you so much, and there will be many more to come. Anyways, it's back to the 90s with us for the game's critical reception. The game was released on November 19th, 1998, to massive critical acclaim. PC Gamer referred to it lovingly as the big one, the game that everyone had been waiting for to come along and raise the bar for what the first-person shooter genre could be. While other games such as Quake and Unreal had improved graphical quality beyond what Doom and Doom 2 had achieved, they did little to evolve the core gameplay aspects. However, as we've seen in this retrospective, Half-Life achieved this evolution with flying colors. In fact, I'm a bit surprised while writing this section of the script how much critical analysis of the game by reviewers at the time aligns perfectly with what I've said so far in this retrospective. I promise I didn't check beforehand. Maybe there's also a takeaway here about the days when game journalists were just gamers and their commentary on games was more akin to the kind of thing we'd hear from a YouTuber in a retrospective rather than the latest IGN reviews. What we do know for certain is that Half-Life had taken the first-person shooter to a new level, and nothing would ever be the same. From this point forward, people would expect more than just a series of levels, however cleverly designed those levels were. Players would want, or even at times demand, something more. The first-person shooter genre wasn't just for beer-drinking metalheads to ravage otherworldly demons. First-person shooters had now proven they could be mainstream, narrative experiences that anyone could enjoy. It would take a few years for the revolution Half-Life initiated to come full circle. Deus Ex created the immersive sim by taking Half-Life's immersive elements to new heights with its RPG mechanics. By 2002, with the release of Medal of Honor Allied Assault, and then in 2003 with the release of Call of Duty, the impact of Half-Life's revolution became unmistakable. For example, let's put into perspective just how much the first-person shooter genre changed over a short span of time. When Half-Life was released, its plot and narrative design came from the passion of a group of 20-year-olds. This was the norm for almost everything that had come before. However, by the time Medal of Honor was released in 2002, a mere 4 years later, the writing and production was overseen by Steven Spielberg, with the game serving as homage to his own Saving Private Ryan. I have a powerful memory of playing that game when it was released on PC, alongside my then 80-year-old grandfather who had fought extensively in the war. I remember being confused at one point and having him point out where to go next to get around a gun emplacement because of his actual real-life experience in that section of the war. That was a pretty big step up from Doom. Again, this is what I mean when I say Half-Life changed everything and set the genre on an entirely new course. Now that I've concluded my playthrough, do you know what game actually reminds me the most of my experience replaying Half-Life in 2025? Dark Souls. There are so many things that Half-Life as a video game does right that Dark Souls also did. Number 1, it keeps things fresh. There's always something new, interesting, or dangerous happening around every corner of the game, especially in a new playthrough. It also rewards player curiosity. It tells its story through an immersive experience and lore that the player needs to actively engage with or seek out. Remember, I've talked about Half-Life 2's story throughout this, but you really don't need to. You could easily play through the game without caring at all. However, when you reward players' curiosity about the world, they will in turn care more deeply about the game, and I think that's one of the reasons that Half-Life fans are so loyal, as are Dark Souls fans. And number 3, it challenges the player. It allows players to use the tools that the game has provided to them to overcome challenges in their own ways. Many of Half-Life's levels might feel unfair at times, and some of the strange negative reviews on Steam actually echo this sentiment. But I think this comes from players who might not fully realize just how many tools Gordon has at his disposal. His sheer speed alone, when mastered, can make him nearly invincible. I see Half-Life and Dark Souls as reminders that the success of games like Dark Souls is no fluke. They show up to remind us that a lot of modern AAA games lack the things that these experiences offer us in spades. These games are timeless because good game design and storytelling are themselves timeless. And to be honest with you, I enjoyed my recent playthrough of Half-Life about as much as I did when I played it in the late 90s. And now we're left with one important question. a question that everyone was asking back in the early 2000s. With the explosion of new, higher quality first-person shooters, what could Valve do to raise the bar even further? How could they live up to their reputation as one of gaming's most innovative companies? And what would Half-Life 2 hold for us? Well, make sure to subscribe so that you can join me on the streets of City 17 in another video. And until then, peace.